what was really clear to Ryan and I, that cloud computing was going to transform every industry in a pretty profound way. And what we went to work on was identifying an industry that we thought was ripe for transformation and especially amenable to the kind of transformation that the internet would bring.
Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show, brought to you by Mistral, a seed stage firm based in Canada. I'm Pablo. I'm a founder turned VC. My goal is to help early stage founders like you find product market fit. Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show. Today we have Jack, the founder and CEO of Clio. Clio is a startup in the legal tech space. They basically did vertical SaaS before it was cool, before it was a thing. And they sell a product that helps lawyers run their firms. They're based in Vancouver. They have over 800 employees and are worth well over $1 billion. Jack, it's a pleasure to have you here on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pablo.
So, the topic of today's episode is how to run a beta program. I think, beta programs are pretty well known. I think most B2B SaaS companies that I speak with do them, but they're not all made equal is how I would summarize it. I think there's much better ways to do it, much worse ways to do it. And oftentimes it's something that kind of people are just going through the motion. They know that you got to run a beta program, so you do it. And then all you really want to do is launch the product. You seem to have done it really kind of thoughtful way that led to a really successful launch and obviously over time to a unicorn and a big company and one of the biggest successes to come out of Canada. So really looking forward to dive into that with you. I think maybe to start, it'd be great to go a little bit backwards and kind of get started on early 2008 and kind of how you came up with the idea in the first place. And then we can dive into the beta program and all those details.
Sure. Yeah, sounds great. So my co-founder, Ryan Govero, and I, back in 2007, I sometimes describe us as two hammers looking for a nail, because what we saw back in 2007 was this enormous technology transformation wave that was cloud computing. And what was really clear to us, even though this is 15 years ago now, is pretty early innings for cloud computing. Salesforce was just starting to get some traction. This was before the first iPhone was released, so very different technological era in many industries. On-prem software was still the dominant computing platform. But what was really clear to Ryan and I is that cloud computing was going to transform every industry in a pretty profound way. And what we went to work on was identifying an industry that we thought was ripe for transformation and especially amenable to the kind of transformation that the internet would bring. And it didn't take us long in surveying these industries to hone in on legal as an area that really had not changed how it operated in hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. The way lawyers.
And for context, you were doing what at the time? Like, were you working? Were you a student? Were you like what kind of phase were you in?
Yeah, so I was at the time working as a product manager at a company called Economics, which was a life sciences company. And Ryan, my co-founder, he and I have been lifelong best friends. We'd always been noodling on different business ideas and going back and forth on what we might be able to do together. Ryan was both pursuing his MBA and working as the IT manager at Gowlings, which is one of Canada's largest law firms, and about 1,000 lawyers. And so he had a first row seat to how technology was being used in law firms, or maybe better put, was not being used in law firms. Hallways full of paper, filing cabinets full of paper, and very manual processes. And the other relationship that Ryan had that really helped us, validate this instinct that we had that there was an opportunity in legal, was with the Law Society of BC. And they're, for U.S. listeners, very analogous to U.S. Bar Association. They're regulator of lawyers. And if a lawyer does something wrong, it's the Bar Association or the Law Society that ends up having to discipline them. And we had a relationship with the director of practice standards at the LSBC that really helped validate this idea that lawyers, number one, struggle with using technology overall, At large law firms, they often compensate for that lack of technology use with sheer manpower. They've got a lot of paralegals and support staff and other folks to make sure that the engine is running and humming along, and that they're not dropping balls like missing key limitation dates or mishandling trust accounts, for example. But solos and small firms didn't have this human infrastructure to help support them. And therefore, that's what the Law Society of BC and many other law societies across Canada and bar associations across the US, what they see is that this solo small firm segment of their membership is the one that struggles the most to stay on top of their practice, and is therefore the group that they end up needing to discipline the most when they drop the ball on some key client deadline or maybe in mishandling trust accounts and so on. And this is really the light bulb moment for Ryan and I, was realizing that there's, number one, a huge opportunity to transform legal technology from on-premise software to cloud-based software, and a gigantic opportunity in this solo and small firm segment, which we eventually realized was, it sounds like a niche, but it's actually 80% of the legal market is lawyers practicing in firms of 1 to 10 lawyers. And fully half of all lawyers practice in small firm, in a solo environment with maybe 1 or 2 support staff. So even though we think about lawyers practicing in these, big office towers in a nice AAA downtown office space with 1,000 lawyers and 5 floors of people, that's not the reality. The reality is it's a very entrepreneurial, very SMB market. And so back in 2007, to kind of set the stage for the discussion around the beta, 2007 was where Ryan and I built the conviction that this was a big market opportunity. We pulled chute, we quit our jobs, and we started building Clio.
And did you, like, maybe on that, I mean, did you quit your jobs? Because a lot of this sounds like top-down market research, right? Understanding cloud computing at a high level, understanding the makeup of the legal industry, dissecting that until you kind of come up on a problem that you feel is worth solving, versus, let's say, scratch your own itch or even customer discovery driven effort. Was that the reality? Like, just with that, you decided, what, let's jump off this cliff and quit our jobs? Or was there a lot more customer discovery that kind of led to that moment?
Yeah, one of the really influential books for me at this time of Clio's journey is a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany by Stephen Gary Blank. And much of the ideas that he puts forth in this book are kind of later built on and elaborated on with some of the concepts in the lean startup, for example. And what Stephen talks about in this book that I think is so important is this idea that you can have an idea for a product, which is great, but a trap many founders fall into is a kind of build it and they will come mentality. They're so excited about their product. They think it's obvious there's customers out there for that product, and don't go through a really important step of the process that he talks about in this book that's called customer development. So go find the customers that you think will buy this product, put your product in front of them, and validate that they'll actually buy it. And as obvious as that sounds, it's a step many startups skip, only to find that they launch the product to an uninterested and unbuying audience. And so where Ryan and I spent a lot of time, and this was moonlighting, by the way, in the early days. Like, we were working evenings and weekends, and I was spending late nights working on this idea and doing this customer development work alongside Ryan. And we really built the conviction that this was an idea that was worth pulling chute on 2 great jobs to go and make a reality. What we were able to do in this early customer development process is just put prototypes in front of solo and small firm lawyers and say, hey, based on this wireframe and based on the capabilities that this product would deliver to you, would you give me your credit card number? Not just, is this interesting to you? Is this something that makes you excited? But is this something you would pay cold, hard cash for? And what would you pay if you were to pay for this product? And that's a really important part of the product validation process, and one that gave us a lot of conviction by the time it came to quitting our jobs and going full time on this thing, that this had traction before we wrote a line of code.
Perfect. So that makes a lot of sense. So now you've got indications that firms really have this problem and are willing to pay for it. When do you start thinking about, are you following this book, Four Steps to the Epiphany, which is a great book, by the way, and I highly recommend it. Are you following kind of step by step, and therefore your next step is clearly, okay, let's run a beta and extract dollars from these clients? Is that how you were thinking about the next step?
So our approach was building out this beta level product, and where we were really deliberate was in framing the beta as something that we believe did not have full product market fit. I think you talked a little bit about, how do you run an unsuccessful beta? How do you run a successful beta? I think many companies, many early stage startups launch a beta with a presumption and maybe even the dependency that all that's being tweaked in the beta is bug fixes. You really don't want to learn anything net new about your customer in the beta. You launch the beta and you're launching the full product 2 weeks later or a month later. It's more of a hardening step to make sure there's no catastrophic bugs. We took the approach with the beta and the way we engage with our customers as, we think we're 80% of the way there with the product and the product market fit. But we're going to really be open-minded about learning new things about what our customers need and building incremental functionality over the course of the beta. And with that view, we launched the beta in March of 2008 and launched the final product, the paid version of the product, 6 months later in October of 2008. And we really created this time box for ourselves to say, hey, we're going to bridge this last 20% over the course of this 6 months. We're going to work really, really hard over this 6 months probably. And we're going to need a lot of highly engaged customers to help us get over this last mile. And with a view to rethinking how the beta program runs and really, again, leaning into this customer development framework that Stephen Blank talks about, we approach the beta as something that we would rather have a small handful or two of very highly engaged customers that are representative of our overall customer base than thousands of lightly engaged customers. And the reality with a lot of beta programs is you get the tire kickers that just come along, sign in once, check out the user interface and play around with it for 5 minutes, and they never come back. And you're obviously you're not getting high information content. You're not getting good signal to noise feedback from those customers. So the question Ryan and I asked ourselves is, how can we really create a bit of a hurdle to getting into the beta so that the customers that are in there really care and are really going to give us valuable feedback? And we came up with this pretty straightforward idea, which was you sign up for access to the beta. You request access to the beta, which is a concept lots of companies do. But the friction point we introduced was you sign up for the beta, and to get into the beta, you need to attend a 30-minute live webinar with one of me or Ryan, and we would walk you through the product, teach you how to use it, give you a bit of a tour, and give these beta customers a chance to give us real-time feedback. And this, two things ended up happening. One, as you would expect, there's a huge drop-off in that the tire kickers were not willing to spend this half hour. The customers that did spend this half hour with us ended up engaging with the product deeply. And we ended up having about 100, very engaged, high information content, high value beta customers giving us a ton of valuable feedback over those 6 months. And not only that, but this 30-minute webinar ended up being something that turned into oftentimes a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour information gathering session with the customers where they actually gave us a huge amount of feedback in real time over the course of this tour of, oh, well, I can't use this product because you don't do X, Y, or Z, or I find this flow a little bit confusing, or where do I go to do X? And so we were able to really quickly hone in on what are the key things they're trying to accomplish, what are the friction points of the product, and importantly, what are the gaps that don't exist in the product that we need to build in time for this full-blown October launch. So those it sounds obvious maybe in terms of like, hey, this is a good way to structure a beta program, but it ended up being transformative to us in terms of how high quality our October release ended up being. and how willing a really substantial percentage of those 100 beta customers were willing to convert to paying customers on October 1st when we flipped the switch and said, okay, your free beta access period is over, and here's the full product, and you're now going to be one of our first 100 paying customers.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think that's what often gets missed. If you think about product market fit, there's really two sides to it. I mean, you have the product and you have the market. And oftentimes the focus is entirely on just changing the product until things work. But half the battle, at least, is figuring out which market you should put this product into. And there's a lot of talk about making things as frictionless as possible, which probably makes sense as your product matures. But in the early days, you really want to make sure you're driving tons of value for those early customers. And that partially means having a really good product. It also partially means having the right customers for that product. And I think that's what you're doing when you kind of up the bar like that. Few quick questions. I mean, the first thing, just to set the stage, like, was it just the two of you at that point that are doing all the work, the sales, the marketing, and the building the actual product?
Yeah, over that first 6 months to launching the product in October, it was the two of us wearing every hat, coding, marketing, selling, doing these webinars. And they obviously ended up being, very time consuming, but they were absolutely worth it, because we could wrap up one of those customer calls and literally swivel our chair and start coding the feature or the bug fix or whatever the case might be that we needed to do to help make the product a better fit for that customer.
These days, and I think things have changed a little bit, and I don't know if you had fundraised at that point, but these days it's pretty common that at that stage you may have raised one, if not two, not $3 million, and have a team of 5-10 people doing that. What do you think about that? Like, would you have rather have a team of 5 or 10 at that point, and therefore have devs doing this and salespeople doing that, or was there value to it just being the two of you in those really early stages?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one of the things that's incredible about a two-person team that is able to hold everything in their head around like what customers want, the customer conversations you just had. Ryan and I, like I said, we've been best friends since we were 8 years old. So extremely high bandwidth conversations. We were just able to hold everything about what Clio needed to do and what our customers were giving us feedback on in our head. So the communication overhead that comes with even a 5-person team ends up being enormous compared to the kind of velocity that a really small team can move when you've got the clarity of vision of what you need to build. So if I had to do it again, I'd probably do it the same way because I think we were just able to iterate and pivot and hold so much context in our heads that we were able to move at the right velocity with the right information. And I think with 5 people, we might have actually had more bandwidth than we needed going into communicating and not enough torque going into actually building the product and writing and shipping code.
Yeah, that definitely foots. And I totally think there is that part of communication overhead that's totally diminished velocity. The other side to it too, I find, is there's power and constraints. And when there's two of you, you can really only focus on so much because you're maxed out. You're probably working 12, 14-hour days or whatever it is. When there's 10 people, you want everybody to be doing something. And
right.
And the challenge is you might do more than you need to and go down wrong tangents that take up so much time and have so much higher trade-offs than you might see at a time. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The other question I want to understand as well, because I think is really important, is you talk about having access to a beta and then having a funnel to find the right ones. But moving up that funnel, like top of the funnel, there's just two of you. What are you doing to get law firms in the first place? Are you smiling and dialing in your city? Are you doing online ads? What was the strategy?
Yeah. So we had, you talked about the power of constraints. We had the power of two constraints. One, there was only the two of us. And the second was we had almost no money. We'd raised $100,000 from friends and family that really went mostly into, like legal and startup costs and our IT infrastructure and some of the very early kind of cloud infrastructure in those days. To answer, one of the questions you asked, we hadn't done a fundraise at this point. So we're really, working off of this $100,000, which created a ton of constraints. And again, in retrospect, I think they were constraints that actually had a very positive outcome on the company. The other backdrop, for this 2008, 2009 period we were launching the product in, was obviously we were in the depths of the financial crisis, and in the worst fundraising environment that existed, over the last 15 years, and we're maybe in the midst of really the only other downturn right now that we've had in the last 15 years. So that made even fundraising that friends and family round challenging, in the sense that people were really worried about where the financial system was headed. And it feels like it was an alternate universe, but people were worried about the financial system as we knew it collapsing entirely. And there's a lot of fear out there. So we had a lot of constraints, and the approach we took was let's tap into this audience of lawyers that, if you think about the technology diffusion curve and crossing the chasm, tap into this group of potential customers that are in the early adopters segment, the technophiles, the people that really are excited about new technologies, and tap into that base as our first early segment of customers to go after. And then we got really deliberate about a PR campaign and a marketing campaign that where we got coverage on some of the top legal technology blogs, like Bob Ambrosi's Law Sites is one example, and where we announced our initial beta, and where we ended up getting the vast majority of our beta customers from, in fact, was just a blog post from a legal technology writer that everyone that cares about legal technology pays attention to. We also invested in trying to create a marketing or a PR angle around the fact that Clio was really the first cloud-based practice management system to launch in beta form and in full form later in October in the world. So we were really the first company to bring cloud computing to legal. And what's very interesting about that is lawyers have very specific fiduciary responsibilities around how they manage and handle client data. And they have an obligation to protect the confidentiality of client data. They have an obligation to have a reasonable expectation of privacy in where they store that client data. So there's a very open question in 2008 around whether cloud computing is an acceptable thing for lawyers to use. And there was a pretty loud contingent of naysayers out there creating a bunch of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around cloud computing for lawyers that we felt we had to counter. And we realized we're either going to get dragged along by this narrative that cloud computing is somehow dangerous and unacceptable for lawyers to use, or we're going to be able to lead the narrative and chart the course for how lawyers should responsibly embrace cloud computing and leverage cloud computing to their advantage. So we obviously chose the latter and created a story around cloud computing in general and what that means for lawyers. And then Clio ends up getting mentioned as an aside when I'm getting quoted or I'm giving a talk or whatever the case might be. And that drove a lot of awareness and inbound interest in Clio as well. So our marketing budget for the first year of our launch for over 2008 was basically a few $100s per month that we were spending, on some very experimental Google ads, and otherwise free, just with this PR effort.
That's really interesting and really unique, because I would think in the early days, especially for something like B2B SaaS, your kind of go-to thing would be, well, just start calling. I mean, you got a list of law firms, right? Like, they're pretty public. So just pick up the phone and start going. Because PR, there's a bit of hit and miss element, and it's also, generally speaking, takes time, like, to develop a strategy, to get it going, and so on. Do you think this is underutilized, like this idea of kind of tying onto a narrative, especially for people going after the long tail, maybe something that founders should be doing more of?
I do think it's underutilized. And I think, too many founders, and I certainly fit in this category in the early days, kind of expect that your company is exciting enough that reporters should be wanting to write about Clio. Of course it's amazing. It's like your baby, right? Like, why isn't everyone writing stories just about Clio? And what I came to realize was, reporters aren't looking to write about specific companies, with very rare exceptions. They're, of course, writing about Google and Uber and Airbnb. In general, they want to be talking about trends, and they want to be talking about, informing their audience around important trends that are happening in their industry. and you want to be part of that story and part of that narrative. And that's actually a much easier thing to do than to get a story written about you specifically. No reporter wants to be, just helping publicize your company. Well, at least most reporters don't. There's certainly some that will write about a specific company, and there's blogs like TechCrunch that do that almost exclusively. But you want to figure out, you really like getting in TechCrunch is about getting in front of your co-founder friends and feeling good that you've got your company covered in TechCrunch. Where you really want to be getting covered is in the kind of publications that your prospective customers are reading and staying on top of what's going on in their industry. And again, I think that's where you can have very powerful customer acquisition economics. It's one of the places, I think that vertical SaaS has a huge advantage relative to horizontal SaaS, where you need to take a much more expensive, like horizontal and brand based and advertising in the New York Times or other mainstream kind of media. You don't need to do that as a vertical SaaS player. You can get very targeted in your approach, get in front of customers through these niche publications that reach maybe only 1 million or 2 million readers. But every single one of those 1 million or 2 million readers is your target segment. And again, the headline can be, cloud computing is coming to legal. You're catching the reader's attention, and then they're going to hear about Clio and they're going to read a soundbite from me in that article. And reporters are usually hungry for content. They're looking for a story. They're looking for a lead that they can sink their teeth into. And I think, more startup founders could be putting more energy into figuring out what's an exciting narrative that my company is part of, as opposed to, trying to get somebody to write an article specifically about your company.
You use PR at the top of the funnel. You get kind of that long tail, especially the ones that seem to be more interested in the funnel, and then you raise the bar through webinars to pick the right ones. You get a few hundred of them into the beta. What really happens in those 6 months? Like, first of all, are you charging these customers, or what's kind of the give and take? And how do you set things up to get the appropriate amount of feedback throughout and really make the right changes over the 6 month period?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there's the initial customer interview. And again, something we paid really close attention to in that initial customer interview was trying to get a sense for whether this customer was representative of the wider customer base. And this is really important when you're putting on your product manager hat as a founder, is you're going to get requests from customers, and some of those requests are going to be really esoteric, really specific requests that are not generalizable. They're looking for you to make basically custom software for their law firm. And other requests are going to be much more generalizable and representative of the market in general. And again, I think the key approach that we took here, that again, this customer development framework espouses, is if you can do a good job of finding 10 representative customers in a large enough niche, you're going to be able to find, if you build that product market fit for those 10 customers, and you do a good job of customer development, really understanding what those 10 customers need and that they'll buy your product, you will be able to find 100 and 1,000 and 10,000 and eventually 100,000 customers if you take those early steps in the right way. So we were very, very selective and very careful in who we let into the beta in those first 10 and 50 and eventually 100 customers. And the bargain that we negotiated with these customers was basically, look, we're going to give you the product for free for the beta period. And it was open-ended as to how long it would be at that point. We hoped it would be about 6 months, but we knew it might take longer. Maybe it'd be shorter, but likely around 6 months or longer. And in exchange, we'd love active feedback from you. So we made it really low friction for them to just click a give us feedback button in the bottom right corner of the app and just send us a note around something that they liked or disliked about the app. And we also asked that they engage with us regularly, and it was around once a month or so, to have some level of follow-up call or webinar and just get feedback on how the product's working for them. And again, we got great initial feedback in that initial onboarding call, but again, a wealth of more deeply rooted feedback after a month or 2 months on the beta where they could really identify, here's the friction points, here's the gaps, here's some of the places I'm struggling in the product. And similarly, here's some of the things I'm loving. So
Were there
we
any
really
major? I'm curious, like those feedback points. Was it mainly UI and small tweaks, and kind of here's how you could remove a step, or were there any? And I know it was a long time ago, so you might not remember. But do you remember any kind of major kind of breakthrough type request that really made you rethink some feature, or add a feature, or take away a feature, something that really changed the course of things?
It was both. Lots of just, hey, found this to be a little bit high friction. Can you help this workflow work a little bit better? So lots of that type of feedback. But we had actually yawning chasms of functionality missing from the product in that initial beta, and some hypotheses that we had just gotten wrong around what the product needed to do. I'll give you one example. One was we didn't have an integrated document management system when we launched the beta. And we figured, hey, there's Dropbox, there's some other, relatively early cloud-based document storage options out there. We don't need to get into document management business with Clio as a first launch vehicle or MVP. And our customers came back loud and clear over the course of that early beta. And in fact, by the time we were, a few days into boarding customers onto the beta and getting feedback on this half-hour walkthrough, Ryan and I were like, "Oh man, like we missed the we missed the feature that customers are saying is mandatory in the product. They want document management integrated when they're looking at their matter-based view. They want to see those documents that are linked and related to their case. They want to be able to attach billable time to those documents." And so we got to work on building a document management system and had it rolled out, about a month into the beta. And again, we're able to get lots of live feedback on that. So it was an example of where we went in and said, rather than doing a really waterfall kind of process and fully speccing out what the product's going to be out of the gate, we're going to build this kernel that we know is absolutely essential and take the approach of rapid iteration on that MVP to add this functionality. So there were, I would say at least 2 or 3 major features that we developed over the course of the beta that we went in believing we didn't need to have as an integrated part of the product.
Perfect. And so, you fast forward through these 6 months, you're getting feedback, some of which is small, some of which is really big. When do you feel like you're really ready for launch? And what does that look like? How do you set that up?
Yeah. So one was when we felt like we'd move from that 80% to 90%, we actually circled a date for a major conference in legal on October 1st of 2008, when we had to commit to that conference and commit to the PR around launch about 3 months before the conference. So we were about halfway through our beta, and we feel like we're tracking to a place where maybe we'll be ready by this conference. And then circled the date, wrote the checks, committed to it, and got, hired an actual PR firm, got on a retainer that felt extremely expensive to us at the time, which was $4,000 a month, committing to, a quarter of intense PR over Q4 of 2008, kind of burned the boats and said, we're launching on October 1st. Fast forward to September, and we're freaking out because we're not ready. We've got a lot left to build. We realized, like a week before we were supposed to launch, that we hadn't actually built any way to charge customers on their credit cards, like all these things that when you really go through the pre-flight checklist, we realized we weren't quite ready. But we just worked like crazy. And even at the conference, I remember being set up in the conference area of the hotel in one of the business centers with Ryan. And we were coding and shipping code on October the 1st, the day we were launching. And, to me, it was a great example of that maxim that, if you feel ready to launch, you're too late, you've waited too long. I think it was very much the case for us where, we needed that forcing factor. You're never going to feel ready, but circling that date, burning the boats and committing to launching out on October 1st, it was a bumpy ride. Some of our customers got, an error page when they tried to sign up. Again, we built the billing system over the course of October. And I think without that forcing factor, we would have easily been shipping, January, February, March of the following year and not had this, amazing launch event and the forcing factor of getting out early and then really starting to learn and iterate. And officially launching also let us shift gears into, okay, let's start thinking about fundraising and getting that team of 5 people you were talking about on board, because now we've got a lot to do and real clarity on what needs to get built next.
What did that look like? I know it wasn't the best timing, late 2008, early 2009, but you did have quite a bit going for you, having gone through this beta and learned everything you learned. What was that fundraising like? I mean, how did you raise that first round?
Yeah, the fundraising was brutal. We, as you pointed out, people were, we actually, got great feedback. And it was kind of frustrating actually to have these 2 messages delivered together. We got feedback that, the pitch we had when we were talking to angel investors or VCs was one of the best pitches they'd ever seen. They loved the idea. They love the product. They love the traction we're showing, but they're just not writing checks right now. Like just, kind of heads down in the sand, like worried about what the impact of the financial crisis is going to be. And people really, for a year there stopped writing checks almost entirely. So we were actually pretty, by the time 2009 was rolling around, we were feeling pretty downtrodden about, our prospects to fundraise, and then end up getting this cold email inbound from a guy named Christoph Jans, who is now one of the managing partners at Point Nine Capital. But at this point, he had just sold his own internet company. He has started investing as an angel investor, and he sent us an email saying exactly that. I've just become an angel investor. I just invested in my first company, a company called Zendesk, which at that point was like 4 guys in Copenhagen. So his first investment was a good one. And so what's hilarious is Christoph had, number one, emailed us from this domain that was web.de. He was talking about investment opportunities in Clio in the body of the email. His email went straight to the spam box. And then what's hilarious is, so we inadvertently cold play or slow play Christoph over the course of a couple of weeks. Because his email's sitting in our spam box. He sends a follow-up saying, just wanted to check back in. I'm really interested in Clio. Is there an opportunity maybe to invest? And a few days after he sent that follow-up, described this as an act of God. But Ryan is bored enough one day to check his spam filter and see what's in there, which I don't think he'd ever done before and probably hasn't done since. Checks his spam filter and sees that these 2 emails from Christoph, forwards it to me and says that this actually looks legit. Can we follow up with Christoph? I drop him an email and we have a great kickoff call. And he ends up, cut to a few months later, he ends up leading our angel round. And, we raised our first $1 million, and the rest is almost history. We got that initial $1 million. We're able to hire, the first few employees, a couple developers, and our first customer support head, have raised, the better part of $400 million since then. But it was that first bet from Christoph, and he ended up being, just a phenomenal support to the company, especially over those first 5 years or so as we were going through the initial growth phase. So I don't know what the takeaway lesson is for your listeners, Pablo. Other than
randomness is a crazy thing. I mean, that's the reality is, the more we do these, the more we realize just how much serendipity plays a role. And that's not to say you wouldn't have raised your round some other way, but when you actually put the pieces together of how a certain round got raised, it really does feel like the analogy of, if I take a deck of cards and I lay it out, it's going to come out a certain way, but the odds of it coming out that way are pretty damn low, right? And so right. It's kind of right. that.
So serendipity is a huge role, and I think that old saying about luck being preparation meeting opportunity. You need to be sure you've done that groundwork. And when we, I think what Christoph saw that made it easy for him to write that check when he did engage with us is that we were customer obsessed. We had great retention metrics. We had good NPS metrics. We had good initial product market fit. We had good, good initial data points on how we could scale customer acquisition through paid channels like Google AdWords. So I really think that you do need to wait for that, that serendipity, that luck to come along, but do everything you can to prepare in terms of having a good story to tell and good customer metrics to tell. And you'll eventually find that investor that wants to write a check against that traction. And I think sometimes founders get that inverted almost and think that they need the investor and they need the investment to go get the customer traction and build the product and build the story. And that's possible sometimes, but the investor is obviously taking a much bigger leap of faith, writing that check as opposed to, trying to be a very small team, try to bootstrap as much as possible and build out that initial traction.
That's totally right. So we'll end it there. I will ask the final question, which is where we like to end all these episodes, which is, when did you feel like you had true product market fit?
I think we felt like we had true product market fit when we had our first beta customer using the product to run her law firm and was really using Clio to make money for herself and depending on Clio in a production environment. And, what was a little bit scary is she did this almost without our permission. One of the disclaimers we had around the product in the beta phase, by the way, was, hey, look, this is really a beta and you could lose your data. We could go down for 6 days. We could dramatically change how the product works. So please don't depend on this product. We want you to use it and we want you to give us feedback, but we don't want you using this in a production law firm environment. And this very first customer, it was a woman named Catherine Marino-Riesman that we actually name our annual customer awards after these days. She was this first customer, and she was our first paying customer, and she was the first beta customer that, Ryan and I started getting like stack traces of her creating errors in the app at all times of the day and night. And she was obviously using the program intensively. And we reached out to her and said, hey, we're sorry you ran into an error here. Are you really depending on this particular bit of functionality working? And she said, yeah, I'm using this for my law firm and I'm trying to bill my clients and everything else. And it was kind of an oh shit moment for me and Ryan where we realized like, oh wow, like the stakes all of a sudden are a lot higher.
Right. That's a good forcing function. That's for sure.
It was another great forcing function where we were just like, hey, look, it was a moment of conviction where, this isn't somebody that's just intellectually curious about our product and giving us feedback. This is somebody depending on it. And it was a real crucible for us where we said we need to make Clio work for Catherine. And we need to make sure that she can run through the product on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and do everything she needs to do with no errors, no hiccups. And it took, probably a month of really intensive work for us over that beta period to make sure that it was working well for Catherine. But we got to that point. And, one of the bits of advice I give startup founders sometimes is you find your Catherine, find that, we often think about building for 10 or 100 or 1,000 customers, but often if you laser focus on the right single customer and just make sure your product is really singing for them, again, you can find 10, you can find 100, you can find 1,000, and finding Catherine and really focusing our efforts on Catherine was enormously clarifying. And at the end of that, to answer your question, is when I felt like, hey, we've got product market fit. We can scale and iterate from here, but we've got that kernel of functionality we can build a huge company around.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot, Jack. I really appreciate it. Maybe just to recap, we went through how you came up with the idea in the first place and how you pretty methodically set up a beta program. You use PR to really drive people through the funnel. You raise the bar with a webinar to only let in the right type of customers. And then you really focused, as you said, even on one single Catherine like customer, and made sure that type of customer could depend on your product. And that's what led to a successful launch and ultimately, the first fundraise and many, many more since. So thanks a lot for sharing your story with us. I think founders will really appreciate it. And there are a lot of great nuggets there that they'll be able to to steal, hopefully, to make their startups more successful.
Well, that's the hope. Well, thanks for having me, Pablo. Really appreciate it. And it's exciting to be part of this podcast.
Thanks so much for listening. If you want to see more content, check out pmf.show.